If I peruse online celiac support groups or social posts or even comments on my YouTube channel, the number one thing I see across the board is fear. Will I get sick if my partner kisses me after he drinks a beer? Will I get sick from gluten in a dishwasher? Will I get sick from breathing gluten in the air? Just fear everywhere. I wanted to do this video to ease your fears so you know that you can live safely with celiac disease while taking some risks here and there. Smart risks, that is. You don't have to live alone in your basement and never go anywhere just because you have celiac disease. The reason I've been thinking about this lately is because I recently got my follow-up celiac panel done. More on that in a second. If you're someone who is gluten-free or living with celiac disease, I'm sure that you are well acquainted with risk aversion. Those of us with celiac are so used to considering all the different scenarios that could make us sick and mitigating those risks. But how do you know if you're too risky or playing it too safe? I know of people on both ends of this spectrum. I have met the celiac who will drink a Corona because it just has a little bit of gluten, who will lick the icing off the top of a regular cupcake, or who will just dust the cracker crumbs off a piece of cheese. On the other hand, I've heard of a lot of people with celiac who will never eat anything outside of their own kitchen, ever. And then there are people like me who fall in between. Whoa! Get it? Because I fall in between those two types of people. I try to assess the risk of each situation and stay safe while also trying to enjoy my life and not feel too restricted. The problem is there are so many opinions out there, professional and not, on how to live safely with celiac disease. How do you trust that what you're doing is actually preventing harm? Before I continue, please remember that in this video, I will be sharing my personal experiences as well as pulling information from Celiac Canada and the Celiac Disease Foundation. I am not a medical professional and this is not medical advice. Now, to make sure that you're staying safe on a gluten-free diet, most people just monitor their symptoms. But there are limitations with this. First, there are some people who don't get symptoms. And second, if you do have symptoms, how do you know that that was caused by gluten and not something else you ate, like dairy or a bunch of beans? I'm not talking from personal experience or anything. One of the best ways of ensuring that you're staying safe on a gluten-free diet is to get your celiac serology test done.
Celiac serology sounds like something from Harry Potter.
Celiac serology.
I'm after serology class.
Should I say what it is? The tissue transglutaminase. Tissue transglutaminase. Glutaminase? Tissue transglutaminase. Tissue transglutaminase. The tissue transglutaminase. Or sometimes it's like little t, big G, dash, big I, little g, big A. That test, that is the test that you do. Both Celiac Canada and the Celiac Disease Foundation recommend getting this testing done on an annual basis to ensure that your levels aren't elevated. After being on a gluten-free diet for a while, your numbers should return to a normal range, meaning that the test looks negative for celiac disease. I'm cured! Unfortunately, this doesn't mean that you're cured. There is no cure for celiac disease. Got it for life, baby! Now, I don't think that it's common knowledge that you should get these follow-up tests done annually. In fact, I was diagnosed in 2016, and I didn't get this follow-up testing done until 2023. So, 7 years. 7 years later. I can do maths. I actually asked the doctor a couple of years ago if I could get the testing done, and the doctor told me no, because there was no point, because I already knew I had celiac disease. So sometimes you need to advocate for yourself. So I finally got this testing done, and I got my numbers back, and they fell within the negative/undetectable range. This means that I have been successfully avoiding gluten, and my risk management has been working. Yahoo! I conquered the celiac! Which got me thinking, it might be helpful for others to know which behaviors I partake in that some may consider to be risky, and what things I absolutely avoid. So here are my personal do's and don'ts to stay safe with celiac disease. I do eat at regular restaurants. This means that they don't have to be a dedicated gluten-free restaurant. Though I do love me a dedicated gluten-free restaurant. The reason that I do this is because I want to be able to enjoy meals with friends who aren't gluten-free, and the majority of the time, I don't want to force people to go to a dedicated gluten-free restaurant who are not gluten-free. Also, since I moved to a small town, there are no dedicated gluten-free restaurants in the area. So if I wasn't flexible, I would never go out to eat. I do have a couple of rules when it comes to deciding on a restaurant though. When I'm picking a restaurant, I pretty much always go with something that has gluten-free marked on the menu, or I call ahead and ask if they have gluten-free options, or if they're aware of celiac disease. If they know what they're talking about, I feel comfortable eating there. If they don't, I run. I should mention that we only eat out 1 or 2 times a month, and the rest of our meals are made at home. Obviously, if you're someone who eats out 5 times a week, your risk is going to go up. I don't eat at restaurants that I've been sick at before. If I have eaten somewhere and they told me that my meal would be gluten-free and I've had a very obvious reaction to it, I don't eat there anymore. Early on after my diagnosis, I was much more trusting than I am now. Even if a restaurant messed up, I'd give them 2 or 3 chances. For example, when we used to live in Toronto, we used to order from our local Domino's. I'm aware the Domino's says that it's not safe for people with celiac, but that was a risk I was willing to take. Until I got glutened maybe 2 or 3 times there from cross contact, and I decided it wasn't worth it anymore. The only time when a restaurant won't be dead to me is if it's a franchised chain, because I find that the safety protocols can really vary depending on where you are. I have seen some small town Domino's locations that are very careful about cross contact. When you ask them to use a clean cutter to cut the pizza, they're like, of course we'll do that. And I feel much more safe ordering from a place like that than the place near us in Toronto. That when I called, they were like, gluten what? Okay, we'll do that. So that's the only time that I won't like completely write off an entire restaurant chain. The only time I'll give a restaurant a second chance is if they can show me that they're mitigating risk. Our local Thai restaurant here has gluten-free marked on the menu, but they deep fry their tofu in the same deep fryer with wontons and spring rolls and all that stuff. So I didn't feel well after we ate there the first time. I went and talked to the owner the second time. If they told me they were willing to pan fry my tofu instead of deep frying it so I wouldn't get sick, I would eat there again. But instead, they told me to eat the wheat-filled wontons. So, I don't. Speaking of wontons, I don't eat from contaminated fryers. When I was first diagnosed, I was a little more lax about contaminated fryers. I would say that the risk I was willing to take depended on how badly I wanted to eat that thing. Probably 90% of the time when I ate something from a contaminated fryer, I would get symptoms. I would get jabby, stabby pains in my gut. Jabby, stabby, ooh, 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 jabby, stabby, ooh, ooh, ooh. It was just a bad idea. It's not even that I was asymptomatic. Like, I was obviously getting cross contact. So I just stopped that. I'm trying to think of what things I would try to eat from a contaminated fryer, and it was French fries or pakoras, because pakoras are made with chickpea flour, so that's like the deep fried thing that was most readily available in the places I was eating at. I would say that like 9 times out of 10 when I had pakoras, I would get jabby. The only other thing I will add to this point is that sometimes when you go to restaurants, the server will encourage you to order the thing, where they're like, oh, people who are gluten-free order this all the time. Nuh-uh. If it's a contaminated fryer, I don't do it. Period. No jabby stabby. I do get someone else to try my food if it looks too good to be true. Now, I would never make like another gluten-free person try my food, but most of the time I'm with Colin or with a friend who can eat gluten, and if something has been put down in front of me that looks too good to be true, I get them to taste it first. Now, unfortunately, because most of the time gluten-free things aren't as good as the real thing, unless it's my homemade baked goods, they will be able to tell that it is gluten-free. and then I have some reassurance before I put it in my mouth. When Colin and I have gone to Boston Pizza, I am always nervous because the crust looks good. The crust there is like fluffy and thick, and I am always paranoid, but it's a cauliflower crust, so Colin can taste it for me and he will detect the hint of cauliflower, and then I'm good to go.
Cauliflower detective!
Now, in the rare event that Colin did try it and it tasted too good to be true, that's when we would just double check with the kitchen or wherever we got the gluten-free product, just to make sure that it is actually gluten-free. I do eat at friends' houses. It's all about communication. Typically, I would ask ahead of time to see what they're making so that I can check what kind of ingredients they'll be using, including spices. And if my friend wants to cook something before I get there, I'll usually ask them to just send some pictures of the ingredient labels so that I can ensure that everything is safe. If they are planning on making something like a charcuterie board, then I'll usually ask if I can just fill up my plate before everyone else starts digging in so that there's no cross contact. And if it is the charcuterie cheese board situation, I will usually just offer to bring the gluten-free crackers so my friends don't have to spend $8 on a box of crackers for me. All of my friends have been really great about this. And if your friends aren't great about this, then they might not really be your friends. I don't eat gluten-free baked goods from a regular bakery because I don't really trust that they're actually gluten-free. There are so many ways that a gluten-free baked good could come into contact with gluten in a regular bakery that it's just not worth the risk. This can come down to how it's baked. If they're just baking gluten-free muffins in a regular kitchen with flour in the air and in the same tins, if they haven't been scrubbed down, scooping gluten ingredients and not thoroughly washing those spoons, there are endless ways that it could happen. And that's just the preparation. But then when it gets stored, is it safe? I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes I will go into a cafe and they have one gluten-free baked good in their roster of baked goods. And the gluten-free item is on the bottom tier with all the crumbs falling down on it and oftentimes touching the gluten baked good. So I don't know if it's the preparation or if it's the storage, but I just don't feel safe eating in those scenarios. The only time I'll make an exception here is if I have talked to the person who's prepared it and I feel good about their protocols. For example, there's a donut place that makes regular donuts and they started offering a gluten-free donut, which I thought was crazy, but the gluten-free donut was like a cake donut done in like a cake pan. And it was baked on a separate day and obviously not deep fried with all the other donuts. So we got one to try, but unfortunately it was really bad. Because this is the whole other thing too, is that if a regular bakery tries to do gluten-free baking, it's probably not going to be very good because they're not skilled at gluten-free baking. It's like not worth the risk and it's also not worth paying for, unfortunately. I do eat food products that aren't certified gluten-free. Now I go into a whole lot of detail in this in my guide for reading labels when you're gluten-free. So if you're like, huh? I don't have to eat only certified gluten-free foods? I would recommend checking out that video. The long and the short of it is, if a product says that it's gluten-free, it is legally required to be gluten-free, even if it's not certified gluten-free. Even if it doesn't say gluten-free, but it's in a low-risk food category and it doesn't have a contains or may contain statement, I will still eat it, like rice, for example. I'm also happy to eat a certified gluten-free product. I'm just saying, I don't only eat those. I don't eat anything that says may contain. If it says may contain, I don't buy it. If I accidentally buy it, I take it back or I give it away. The only exception here is if I was going to a friend's house and they prepared a soup that had 1 teaspoon of a spice that says may contain on it. The chances of me getting above 20 parts per million from a may contain spice in that small amount that was used in a whole vat of soup is so low. I don't even know that it would be possible. So in that instance, I would eat the soup. I would be totally fine with it. What I wouldn't be fine with is eating a whole plate of nachos that were made with corn chips that say may contain wheat, because the volume of the may contain that I'd be eating would be significantly exponentially bigger than that with the soup. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments below if that made sense. If not, I will clarify. I do eat gluten-free oats. I actually could do a whole video talking about the whole controversy with gluten-free oats. If you want to see that video, let me know in the comments below. So I'll try to keep this nice and concise. Gluten-Free Watchdog recently tested a whole bunch of gluten-free oat products and found that I think all of them, if not most of them, contained above 20 parts per million of gluten. And in case you missed it, 20 parts per million is the amount of gluten that a celiac can safely ingest without having an autoimmune reaction, based on research. So there are some people with celiac that I know that have just sworn off oats until they are 100% sure that they are below the 20 parts per million. But I am still eating gluten-free oats. I am, however, picky about which gluten-free oats I buy. Since Gluten-Free Watchdog released that statement, I only buy Purity Protocol oats. So that means the oats that have been grown gluten-free and not gluten-free by removal. If I find that there is a certain brand of oats that is not making me feel great, then I usually won't buy it again, but I don't usually throw it out. I will usually use those oats, not for my morning bowl of oatmeal, but for something where I would be eating less of them. For example, I'll make granola that I would just be sprinkling a smaller amount on top. Because when you think about the 20 parts per million, you are much more likely to be getting more gluten in a half a cup, a bowl of oatmeal than in 2 tablespoons sprinkled on top. I will say that in Canada, we seem to have stricter protocols on oats than there are in the US. For example, Cheerios cannot be labeled gluten-free in Canada because they're not made with gluten-free oats. They're made with oats and then there's some sort of removal process to remove the gluten. So I would say that if you get a reaction from eating Cheerios or oat products like that, or if you eat those and you find that your celiac panel shows your numbers are elevated, you might want to cut that out or stick to Purity Protocol oats. I do allow gluten foods in our house. I know that there are some people with celiac that want their entire household to be gluten-free so that they are sure that they are safe. And while this might be the right choice for some people, I don't feel like it's necessary for us. Because there's only 2 of us in the household right now, it's really not hard to keep things separate. If you had 10 people living in your house, I can see how it would be a little bit harder. We do keep Colin's gluten bread in a separate area and we have separate toasters. If Colin gets something like a frozen pizza, he will usually bake it on an upside down baking sheet covered with parchment paper. This is overkill. You definitely can use the same baking sheets and pans as long as you scrub them with hot water and soap, but we don't want to have to scrub that hard. Colin does eat my homemade gluten-free bread and pizza, but most of the time we do just buy him his own stuff like bread and English muffins and bagels and all of that, mostly to save me from needing to bake all of that for the 2 of us, because that's a lot of work and you eat too much. So while I do allow gluten in our house, I don't have regular flour or do regular baking in the house. This is really a comfort level thing. I do think that you could successfully do regular baking in a household with someone who's gluten-free, but in my opinion, baking makes a big mess. Flour gets in the air, it settles on surfaces. You would need to have all separate baking powder, sugar, baking soda, all those baking ingredients to be totally safe. And I just think that's a lot. Plus, Colin doesn't really want to bake things with regular flour that I can't eat. Because what's the point if you can't share it together? The joy of food is sharing. I don't cheat. I do treat. I don't cheat. If you're a celiac like me and you are very symptomatic when you eat gluten, I think it's kind of a no-brainer to not cheat because I just get so ill. It's just not, there is no croissant in the world that would make it worth the symptoms that I get afterwards. But I can totally understand the people who are asymptomatic would have the temptation to cheat because there really are no short-term consequences and you can't see the long-term consequences of it. So I treat myself so that I don't feel that temptation to cheat. This is why I leveled up my culinary skills and I started developing my own recipes, and why I started my courses to teach other people. So if there's other people out there that might feel the temptation to cheat, they can fulfill that craving at home safely with a gluten-free version that actually fulfills the craving. For example, I was really missing getting waffles at a restaurant, like a beautiful Belgian waffle with all the toppings and everything. So I got myself a waffle press. I developed a killer waffle recipe that didn't make me feel like I was missing out on anything. I did a similar thing with sushi. I was really missing getting rolls with yam tempura specifically. So we learned how to make sushi at home, and we make yam tempura rolls, and I never feel that temptation to go out and cheat because I know I can make it at home. I realize that it's definitely more work to do this, but for me, it is totally worth it. I save money, I get to eat the delicious thing, and it's 100% safe. And if you're someone who really is against cooking or baking for yourself, then go to the grocery store, find a dedicated gluten-free restaurant, find that thing that will satisfy your craving, and ensure that you don't cheat, because your health comes first. I hope that if you are someone who was super fearful before, that watching this video has maybe made you feel like, okay, maybe I can try a regular restaurant, or maybe I can go eat at my friend's house and not be so scared that it's going to have these detrimental effects on your health. That there are people like me who do these things regularly and also stay safe. And if you're someone who's a little bit more loosey-goosey with the way you live your gluten-free life, then maybe this is your sign to get your celiac blood panel done and make sure that the way you're living is not causing detrimental effects on your health. And because I'm a sucker for nuance, another consideration is if you're caring for someone with celiac. If you're caring for a child who has celiac disease, it makes sense to be more risk averse because you're making decisions about someone else's health. Whew. Thanks for coming along for the ride. I think that I've covered all of my do's and don'ts, but if there's anything you think I'm missing, let me know in the comments below and I'll address it. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Stabby, stabby, do, 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 do.
This is my gluten gut, and it hurts so bad I cry. Don't stab my gut, my jabby, jabby gut. Wouldn't it be nice if I could eat a croissant tomorrow? I would smile. She eats all the gluten all the day long. Jabby stabby, ooh, 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 jabby stabby, ooh, 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 oh, jabby stabby, oh, I'm gonna have a poop tonight.